Well, if you would have asked me a couple of years ago, Jeff, hey, are you suffering through some issues, which I would have said, "Pff, no, I'm fine. That's the default answer for everything, right? A lot of people, I'm fine. Well, I've learned along the way that when most people say they're fine, they're not fine. They're not fine. And I wasn't fine. But I finally got to a point where I was like, I need some help. And the hardest step is that first step, right? Once you take that, I don't care if you're a cop or whatever, if you're suffering out there, it doesn't matter who you are or what your background is. The hardest is to take that first step. And that's where I believe not only taking the first step, but having the right tribe around you, the right people around you.
Welcome to episode 23 of People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey M. Zucker, a serial entrepreneur here to learn how innovators are creating outsized, transformational social impact. Today's episode features Patrick Fitzgibbons, a retired police commander with over 2 decades of experience. He is also an author, coach, speaker, and professor. After a successful law enforcement career, Patrick continues to give back to the criminal justice profession via his podcast, CJ Evolution, and his work in first responders mental health. He is a former Army paratrooper and an avid supporter of active military members and veterans. Patrick and I discussed his career in law enforcement and how things have changed lately, drug policy, mental health, and more. Here is Patrick Fitzgibbons on People Are the Answer. Patrick, thank you so much for joining me on People Are the Answer.
Jeffrey, thank you. It's an honor to be here, brother. Thanks for having me on.
Glad to have you. And maybe you could start off by just telling us where you're based and what your current role is.
Well, I spent 23 years in law enforcement. I retired from an agency in Colorado. And so I kind of milled around after I retired and kind of did some traveling, wrote a book for first responders. And then I started working for a company a couple months ago called FHE Health. And I work in a program that's specifically designed for first responders. And Jeff, when I talk about first responders, I'm talking about like fire EMS, paramedics, not just cops, but cops are included. And so I'm a national outreach liaison. So I try to connect first responders who are suffering with mental health issues or addiction or both to the services they need. And I am currently in Phoenix, Arizona. I relocated from Colorado and I love the weather here. I just need to survive a summer here.
Got it. Thanks. Yeah, good luck with that. Appreciate you sharing. I mentioned to you before we started recording
Yeah.
that a lot of the guests have either been thus far close friends or friends of friends. But we met sort of online,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I think that could be interesting, to get to know you better a little
Sure.
bit here in front of the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Thanks again. Yeah, and I'm based in Denver, so
Nice. And
um,
just moved from Denver.
yeah, so sorry I missed you, but glad we're connecting here.
Nice.
So, in general, what would you say motivates you?
Uh, right now, what motivates me is the possibility of getting up and changing somebody's life for the better, specifically helping somebody that needs help. That's what motivates me. That's what gets me up in the morning, Jeff. I went through a pretty tough time in my life not too long ago: depression, isolation, some other stuff. And what really helped me was, not only reaching out, but people who helped me, and provided me resources, meaning places that I could go for treatment and stuff like that. And so now I want to reciprocate. I want to give back, and that really motivates me in the morning to get up and just try to help people, and not just first responders, but people in general, to the best of my ability. That's what motivates me.
I really appreciate that. Helping others is an amazing way to spend your life, so it's glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I'm curious. So you lived in Colorado for a while. Is that where you're from originally, or where did you grow up?
I grew up mostly in Colorado. I was a military brat. I moved around a lot when I was really, really young. My dad was a lawyer in the army. And so we moved around, lived over in Europe, for a while. I came to Colorado probably when I was about 10 or 11 and spent most of my life in Colorado. My dad got stationed. You probably know Jeff. I don't know, maybe you do. Fitzsimmons Army Medical Center used to be over in Aurora. He was
Mhm.
stationed there as a JAG officer. And I pretty much stayed in Colorado my entire life, with the exception of me being, I was in the military, I was in the Army, I was down in North Carolina for a while.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's how I ended up in Colorado, and then spent
Got it.
a law enforcement career in Colorado between two agencies.
Got it. Very nice. Well, I'm sure the state misses you. You mentioned being in North Carolina. I'm curious, was that at Fort Bragg?
I was at Fort Bragg. I was with
Yeah.
the 82nd Airborne Division down at Fort Bragg a long, long time ago, jumping out of perfectly good airplanes.
Nice. I'm sure that was interesting and thrilling. I knew the name Fort Bragg. Having I grew up in South Carolina in
Oh,
Charleston.
there you go.
Lived in Denver for about 6 years now, and I actually there was an ice rink on that site, and I actually had a hockey game, or maybe it was a tournament there as a kid.
Yeah, I love the Carolinas. I mean, I always said if there was one place that I would move to, of course, I'm relocated to Arizona, but I love North Carolina. I love both the Carolinas, but I really liked it when I was there. I didn't see a lot of it when I was there, but what I saw, I loved. And I remember, when my ex wife and I were, down there, and I was stationed at Fort Bragg, we used to go down to Wilmington and Kerr Beach and
Mhm.
all those cool places in North Carolina. Great place. Very, very good
Yeah.
people down there.
So that's a good segue into just kind of getting into your career a little further.
Yeah.
So you started off in the Army.
Yeah.
You said 82nd Airborne.
Yes.
And what was sort of, obviously it's a really intense experience. You dedicated a really important part of your life to it. What, looking back, are your sort of key takeaways from your time in the military?
Well, I mean, for me, like most military members, and I'm just speaking for me, I learned a lot of self discipline. I learned things like chain of command and rank structure and things like that. Learning to overcome what seem to be insurmountable odds sometimes, pushing yourself further, meaning physically and mentally. So, but I learned, all the discipline, self control. And I came from a military family. Like I mentioned, my father was in the military. And I didn't go until the Army, Jeffrey, until I was 21. So I was an old guy. I wasn't right out of high school like the younger guys. But yeah, I mean, there were so many takeaways, but I would say discipline, motivation, pushing yourself to higher heights and higher limits, mentally, physically, leadership ability. So I learned all that, and that was, I think, a little bit easy to transfer those skills that I learned and those traits into a law enforcement career. And law enforcement is paramilitary. If you're familiar, your listeners are familiar with the term. I mean, they have rank, structure and chain of command and stuff like that. So, and I come from a law enforcement family too, so I have a lot of relatives that were Chicago police officers, and it was in my blood. So that was my natural progression. I knew I wanted to continue to serve this in this time my community, and so I just gravitated towards that. It was a good fit.
And how long were you in the police, or were you a police officer?
I was a police officer for about 23 years. I started out on patrol, as a patrol officer, like where everybody starts. I was a detective. I was a SWAT guy for a while. I was a street supervisor. And then I retired as an operations commander, which is I was in charge of all the patrol operations and patrol officers on the street. And then in 2019, I said, I want to do something else. Got a little burned out. I admit it, with law enforcement. And so I got out, and I have a podcast, as you know. So I worked on that. I actually started that when I was still in the job in law enforcement, but I wanted to work more on that and focus that. I'm also a adjunct college professor. You know the area, Jeffrey. Down at CU Denver and Metro State and things like that. So I've been doing that for a while. So I wanted to continue on, kind of serving and teaching and things like that, which I absolutely love. Um, and then, like I said, I went through a bad period in my life, which brought me down to, Florida for treatment. And then I subsequently started working for the company I mentioned. Yeah, everything comes full circle, man. But I had a great career, ups and downs, just like any other career.
It sounds like you got to try a little bit of everything in terms
Yeah.
of the types of jobs, and you must have learned quite a bit getting to see things from different perspectives.
Absolutely. Everybody has a different story. Everybody has a different background, obviously. The one thing I learned too in law enforcement is, it took me a while, but everybody's carrying something. Everybody has their baggage. Everybody's going through their own problems, and so I really learned that more as I grew in law enforcement. That the person just never knows the person who cuts you off in traffic. You don't know what they're going through. Yeah, you get mad or pissed, but they could be going. They're probably going through something. So we just got to be nicer to each other. And I know that's tough sometimes, but you never know what people are going through.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm curious. You left law enforcement in 2019. I feel like it probably has changed a decent amount since then, given everything that's happened in our world. Um, what are your sort of thoughts on the recent sort of shift in both society and kind of some of the pressures on the people in that position, and just really how things have shaken out lately?
Well, I always tell people, and this is just my view. I think a lot of people support, majority of people support law enforcement. Are there bad cops? Yes, they're bad cops, just like they're bad pilots and drivers and everything else. Law enforcement continues to evolve. It continues to change. I think we need to change. We need to do some reform. And law enforcement's resilient. We'll come back. The one thing that concerns me now with law enforcement in particular is we're not seeing the amount of people getting into the field like we were, when I was a young cop. And there's a variety of reasons for that, but thankfully people still are. But I think overall, I mean, change is good, Jeff. I mean, you're either going to change, you're either going to go with change or go kicking and screaming because it's going to happen.
Yeah,
Now, I don't necessarily agree with all the criticism against law enforcement out there, but I do believe that the majority of people, majority of Americans support law enforcement. They're just not as vocal
right.
as they used to be, just for a variety of reasons. But it's an honorable profession, and thank God people are still signing up for it and serving because it is a good job. It's a
Yeah,
lot of pressure. Things have, you mentioned, changed. Things have changed tremendously since I've been on the job. But I think we need to, as law enforcement, we need to do a better job at making those connections and those inroads in the communities that we really need to work on.
yeah, absolutely. You mentioned it being harder to recruit these days. I've
Hmm.
found that to be the case in a variety of scrutinized jobs. Like you even hear
Sure.
about youth sports being harder to get refs because people are harder and harder on them. The country seems to be angry since COVID.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine the difficulty in getting people to work there. And I hope that we're able to continue to get good people in those jobs.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's not just law enforcement, like you mentioned, Jeff. You made a good point. I mean, it's a lot of different industries that like restaurant workers.
Yeah.
There's a shortage for people working in restaurants and other service industries. But now in law enforcement, some departments, a lot of departments are offering like an incentive, a sign-on bonus
Mm.
to get people to join. But if you're a young officer, I mean, I get where they're coming from. If you're a young officer or if you're a young person considering a career in law enforcement, uh, and I'm not, this is not a lock on law enforcement. Why would you? So you really have, even you look at the news and you see cops getting shot at all the time and all this other stuff. So it is a very tough job, and you're not going to get rich off of it.
Yeah.
You're not going to make a ton of money, but you don't get into it for the money. You get into it because you're passionate about making a difference and helping your community. And like I said, I'm glad that young men and women still want to become officers because it is a good job.
I was recently involved in a project that was a partnership between MIT and Stand Together Ventures Labs called
Hmm.
Unbundled Policing. And it was
Uh-huh.
basically a startup incubator for whether businesses or nonprofits that are aiming to help policing be unbundled. Not It's not defund the police. It's, are there areas that that companies or technologies or nonprofits can help in, that allow the police to better do their job, or to
Hmm.
prefer to focus on the things that they're good at. And I saw just an incredible number of innovations, whether it be software to help assess situations faster and easier and to send the right people to the right places, or whether it was a mechanical device. It's just really, really interesting
Yeah.
stuff, and I'm curious what you think in general about the concept of the police being able to focus more on crime and less on, things that maybe isn't their expertise, like mental health, or just maybe things that aren't worth their time, like potentially traffic incidents.
I love that idea, and I'm all for it. I love the idea of, first of all, technology, because when I was a young, and I'll get to the other part, when I was a young officer, we didn't have the technology we obviously have now. So things like predictive analysis and crime patterns and using numbers to crunch, data to determine where we're going to put resources as far as, where the crime spikes are all great things. I mean, the technology that we have now is amazing. The modern day patrol car is basically just a driving computer.
Yeah.
So you can fingerprint people in the car. You can do all kinds of stuff. Not in every agency, but most agencies. Now, the second part of that is I believe that law enforcement. We're kind of a jack of all trades. I mean, when I first got into law enforcement, and a lot of it's dependent on where you're at geographically as a police officer, but we weren't going to a lot of calls where people were in mental crisis, mental health crisis. Now it's like every day.
Mm.
Now, there has been a trend that's happening within the law enforcement field where, a lot of agencies have adopted co-responders, like people who are in the mental health field, civilians that have the clinical background to travel with law enforcement and do that. I'm all for that. But then again, if something, hits the fan, then we have to protect, a clinician, which is our job. But I tend to kind of ride the fence with this. I mean, I know you have to take a side, but I mean that's part of our job. Anyway, the reality is that we're going on more and more mental health calls. A lot of officers are trained in they call it CIT, crisis intervention, and stuff like that. But the flip side is that we're not clinicians. We're not the experts. But I do. It's all dependent on where you're at, Jeff. I mean, so you might have some agencies that are focused more on crime because every department's different. Then you might have agencies that are more focused on the clinician approach where people respond with clinicians. The reality is that this is the world we're in, and law enforcement kind of is gets the brunt. I mean, everything kind of gets filtered down with law enforcement because we're the front line.
Yeah.
So we're the the people that are going to you know respond to that 911 call. But yeah, I mean, I believe in crime enforcement. I mean, that is a central focus of law enforcement. But I also believe as society changes and society adapts and the needs and wants of society change, and we have to be able to adapt to that.
Yeah.
And resiliency is a core part of law enforcement, but that's just where we're at now. And any tool we can use to kind of mitigate a situation or diffuse a situation, if that means a co-responder, mental health professional, I'm all for it. But then, the flip side is that I'm also, I believe in, crime control and things like that.
Mhm.
The key is to be well rounded and use the resources available to law enforcement professionals.
How do you think the resource, usage has been in recent history? I'm just
Well,
curious.
that's the thing. I mean, there's like many industries, there's never enough money.
Right.
Law enforcement gets a budget. I remember dealing with budget issues. I mean, we get a budget, and there's only so much to go around because if you're working for a municipality, it's not just the police department, it's the fire department. Everybody has different their own allotted budgets. So that's always going to be an issue. The thing is that doing the best you can with the resources you have. I do think that as time goes on, I mean, it gets better a little bit, but again, it's dependent on where you're at, Jeff. So
Yeah.
LAPD probably has more resources than Denver PD, just by the
Yeah.
sheer size of LA and in their budget. I do think it's gone better, but a lot of this is political too. So
Right.
if you have an agency, if you have a community that you mentioned defund, earlier, doesn't believe in pushing a lot of resources to law enforcement, then you're going to get what you asked for, and then
Yeah.
crime is going to spike. And this is happening now in some areas where there was a push to kind of limit resources or defund, whatever word we want to use, law enforcement. And now what's happening? Crime is spiking, so they have to hire
Right.
more cops. So a
Yeah.
lot of it is depend on geography, where you're at in the country. Some departments, again, have more resources than others, but usually that's up to the city councils and the municipalities to determine what kind of budget the police departments are going to have and what resources are going to be available to them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. I probably have a couple more questions related to your law
No, go
enforcement
ahead.
background. Well, let's come back to a couple of them because
Hmm.
I am curious a little bit about your current endeavors.
Hmm.
Um, you're a professor. You have a podcast. You talked about FHE health. Where do you want to get started?
Well, let's talk about FHE health. Um, I went through a dark period a while ago in my life: depression, isolation, suicidal ideation. As law enforcement, as first responders, people are we're just not designed to see trauma daily. We're just not built that way. Nobody, whether you're law enforcement or not, regular person, the average person sees about a handful of trauma related incidents in their life: death of a family, car crash, whatever, divorce. Law enforcement, first responders, dispatchers, fire, I mean, they see that on a daily basis. So eventually it's going to get to you. So it got to me. That, ended me up in treatment. I reached out, I landed in treatment at a place called Florida House Experience, FHE, and a program specifically designed for first responders called Shatterproof.
I'm glad you got the help you needed and went into the
Yeah,
program.
I appreciate it. But when I was there for about a month, and it's designed for about a month and that's done for a reason. Usually it takes a while for things to sink in, treatment and things like that. And that's why, you're there or a patient is there for about a month. But when I was there, I was like, I'm retired and, don't have much going on. And I said, after I'm done, I really want to, I started talking to people and I really wanted to work for the organization, that I was in treatment at. And so, long story short, I'm here now, and I'm a national outreach liaison, one of them for FHE and Shatterproof for first responders. So my job now is to connect, um, you know, local law enforcement wherever I'm at, law enforcement agencies really around the country, to the resources available to them and their people with Shatterproof and FHE. And the one thing I like about this treatment facility is it's just not a traditional treatment facility. Yeah, we have group counseling and stuff like that, but it takes a little more of a holistic approach. Breath work, yoga, music therapy, along with some cutting edge, mental health treatment. If you're familiar with EMDR, RRT, neurostimulation, where they actually map your brain and they focus on areas that the brain might be deficient in, like depression or isolation. So I love what I do because it gives me a chance to help first responders that are suffering. Jeff, an average of 39% of first responders out there are suffering right now. And that's the number we know about.
Wow.
39% are suffering from mental health issues, addiction, or both. And so it's a huge problem within the first responder community. The problem with first responders, and I can speak for myself because I was there, is we don't like asking for help. We have that
Yeah.
ego and hubris,
And you're
whatever you
used to
want to call
being
it.
the ones that do the helping,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So it's very hard for first responders to reach out and ask for help. Now, the one thing that makes Shatterproof unique is that 75, 80% of the people down there, clinicians, staff, are former first responders. They went through treatment. So that brings a lot of credibility
Mm.
to the program because you have somebody that's in front of you who might be a counselor, who used to be a cop or a fireman or a paramedic, and they understand you because they can understand where we're coming from. Law enforcement first responders are a community within a community, and you can't treat first responders, as far as treatment goes, the same way you would treat, a person that's never been in the first responder community because they're unique. Not that we're better, but we have unique needs, that we have to talk about and get out because of the things we see and the things we experience.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm just proud to be part of FHE and Shatterproof. And again, I love what I do, love helping people. You mentioned my show. I've had my podcast, CJ Evolution, for about 7 years now.
Congrats.
It's a passion of mine. I got about 460 episodes, and it's I've just been blessed, Jeff. I mean, I got a lot of people that reach out to me, want to come on the show now. And again, it's been a it's been a great ride. You're a podcaster, It's once it gets in your blood, man. I just love doing it. I love talking to
Yeah,
people. I love interviewing people because I learn all the time.
exactly.
And yeah, I just love what I'm doing now, and I'm happy. Not that I wasn't happy before, but I'm really doing what I love now.
Yeah, it sounds like you found a new path that maybe was unexpected initially, and yeah,
It's funny
that
how
sounds
life
great.
turns out, brother. Right?
Absolutely. And are you still a professor as well?
I've kind of taken a back seat to that. I taught at CU Denver and Metro and CCD, Ames Community College, if you're familiar with that.
Hmm.
But I've been teaching at the higher level for about 12, 13 years. But now with my new role in podcasting and obviously being at a different state, I'm not teaching
Right.
at the moment.
Got it.
But I love teaching. I love teaching the next generation of criminal justice professionals, and they learn from me, I learn from them, and it's always been a passion of mine, and like I said, I've been doing it for a long time.
What are the types of classes that you've taught in criminal justice?
I teach like constitutional law and substantive criminal law and like crime, criminalistics, crime scene investigation, intro to policing. So I really run the gamut of things that I've taught over the years. And again, I'm not an expert, but I've just,
Yeah.
I have the experience, but I just try to impart, the things that I've learned over the years from a long law enforcement career. But I really can, I really teach. I don't teach like math classes because I suck at
Right.
math, but I teach a lot of different criminal justice, topics when needed.
Yeah. Awesome. Um, FHE Health sounds awesome. What you guys do, the people that you
Yeah.
help, these first responders that
Hmm.
are in need. Um, can you speak any further to sort of the personalized treatment that you guys give? I mean, I know you talked about first responders and everything, and that is a very unique perspective. But I just had in my notes here that it was, personalized treatment. I was just curious if you had anything more to add.
Well, everybody's treatment's going to be different, So when somebody's because people are different and they require different needs. So when people get down there, a patient like when I went through, I'll use me as an example. So when I went through treatment, you're in intake, and the one thing about Shatterproof and FHE is they don't treat you like a patient. I mean, you are a patient, but you're not treated like a patient. You're treated with dignity and respect. You're not running around in some hospital gown, like one through over the cuckoo's nest and stuff with schmucks on and stuff. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's how some facilities are.
Yeah.
So you're treated with dignity and respect. Now, different needs. I was down there for mental health. Mental health. I wasn't down there for addiction issues. So, say somebody goes down there for alcoholism or a drug issue, or maybe which is all tied
Yeah.
into mental health. Treatments are going to be tailored toward that individual. But me, I was down there for mental health, like I mentioned before. So, get the intake, do an assessment, evaluation, talk to a psychiatrist. There is medication involved sometimes, depending on the individual, and then I'm in intake for a while, maybe 2 or 3 days, because that was still COVID was pretty prevalent, and so they want to make sure that you're clear of COVID. And then I go across the street to the campus, which is beautiful, pool, I mean it's down in Florida, Jeff,
Yeah.
and so I'm housed with other first responders because they keep the first responders separate. Again, not because we're better, but they want to keep the first responders separate from the general population. And then again, treatment is going to be designed towards the individual. So I mentioned neurostimulation, and that is an amazing process where, I mean, it's cutting end technology where they literally map your brain. They put little probes. It's not electroshock therapy, if people are thinking it's not that. They put little probes on your head, and they literally kind of map where all the problem areas are. Neuroscientists, people that are experts in brain health and neuro stuff, they look at your brain and they can say, all right, well, Pat is suffering from depression, PTSD. Now we're going to focus on those areas, and the neurostimulation is basically little microamps of stimulation in your brain, different parts of your brain that kind of rebuilds, helps repair those neurons. And really, it is I mean, after about 3 or 4 sessions, I could feel the difference, coupled with the yoga and the music therapy and the breath work and other things that they do. But there really what isn't like a cookie cutter approach with most facilities where you're in a group and everybody's talking about the same thing. Everybody, down at FHE and Shatterproof has their own tailored, treatment plan specific to them.
Got it.
And that's the beautiful thing down there, I think, because it's such cutting edge stuff, cutting edge treatments, but it's all tailored towards the individual.
Got it. Well, sounds like you guys are doing some incredible work.
And it's needed, Jeff. I mean, like I said, I mean that it is so needed out there. Law enforcement, the responder communities are tough people
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
work with. They're amazing people, but they're very reluctant to come forward, and for obvious reasons. Imagine if you're an airline pilot, Jeff, and I'm your co-pilot. You're the main guy, and you come to me and say, "Look, I'm having some problems." I want to be like, "Well, crap! I don't want to fly with Jeff.
Right.
Might crash the plane." Same with law enforcement. If I come to you, we're both cops, and I say, "Jeff, I'm really going through some hard time." Not that you would do it, but a lot of cops would. Well, I don't want to. I don't want to work with Pat anymore. I don't know if he's going to get my back or. So
Right.
that's the stigma, with not only law enforcement, with a lot of industries. Now, the good thing about law enforcement is we've have made strides, with awareness and law enforcement leaders recognizing that we have a huge problem within law enforcement when it comes to mental health and wellness, but there's still a long way to go.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that you talk about your own mental health, that you're out there and showing people that it is okay to get help when you need it and to show other first
Yeah.
responders that.
Well, if you would have asked me a couple of years ago, Jeff, hey, are you suffering through some issues? Which I would have said, "Pff, no, I'm fine." That's the default answer for everything, right? A lot of people, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Well, I've learned along the way that when most people say they're fine, they're not fine. They're not fine.
Yeah.
And I wasn't fine. But I finally got to a point where I was like, I need some help. And the hardest step is that first step, right? Once you take that, I don't care if you're a cop or whatever, if you're suffering out there, it doesn't matter who you are or what your background is. The hardest is to take that first step. And that's where I believe not only taking the first step, but having the right tribe around you, the right people around you
Yeah.
that are encouraging you. And thankfully, I had the right people, family, close friends that were saying, you need some help. We're going to be here for you. We're going to support you. And that's another thing about the program down in Florida, Shatterproof, is even after you're done with treatment, brother, it doesn't stop there. They gave me the foundation, to go forward after I left treatment. And there's an alumni network all over the country. There's additional resources even after you leave the program. So it doesn't stop after treatment, at least in my opinion. It keeps
Yeah.
going. You have to keep
That's
taking care of
important.
yourself. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, given our talk on mental health and some of the
Hmm.
things that you've dealt with, as well as your background in law enforcement, I'm curious where you stand on drug policy. As myself, I'm a huge drug policy advocate. Have been a board member at the Marijuana Policy Project since 2017, and have been fighting to end the war on drugs and a lot of the injustices that have surrounded it. And
Hmm.
pretty much anytime I talk to someone in law enforcement, I'm interested in their perspective.
Are you talking about like marijuana or just marijuana or what?
I mean, so yeah, I'm on the board at MPP, but and I am a big cannabis legalization advocate. But just in general, I feel that there've been a lot of injustices around the war on drugs.
Hmm.
People going to jail for things that might be mental health issues, where instead of getting mental health treatment, they're getting thrown in a cage,
I
basically. And I
agree.
think some of that's been enforced differently by race
Absolutely.
and other things. So it's something that we're all fighting to end in my sort of circle. And law enforcement has they've seen different perspectives on it. They have varying
Yeah.
perspectives on it. And I know fighting for legalization, law enforcement's often our most difficult opponent. Um, Generally, once legalization occurs, whether it's medical or full adult use, law enforcement is fine with it. But they're very often our biggest opponents.
Yeah, and I can see the reason why. When it comes to marijuana, I've never, Jeff. I mean, I did what they told me to do when I was a cop. I never really cared about marijuana. Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't say that. I mean, law enforcement, or marijuana, as you know, can sometimes be a gateway drug and all. I get that, but
I
when I
mean,
was a
I'm
police
gonna
officer,
just interject briefly. Statistics show that it's not a gateway drug.
oh,
I
oh,
have to
I stand
interject,
corrected. No,
and just because I
I
spent the week
yeah,
lobbying for medical
you're the
cannabis in
expert,
South Carolina. Yeah, so the
but
opponents say that a lot, but I can cite you the resources.
but
But go ahead.
I never cared about marijuana. I mean, I
Yeah,
would much rather focus on like fentanyl the
yeah,
harder stuff, heroin and stuff like that.
yeah.
Those are the real issues. And you live in
Stuff that kills
Colorado.
people. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
you live in Colorado. I mean, we were the first state to legalize
Yep.
marijuana. And being a law enforcement, we didn't see some big, huge spike in crime.
Right.
We still see more problems with alcohol in this country
Okay.
than we do with marijuana. I've never gone to a fight. I've never gone to a bar fight or a house fight or whatever, or domestic, where people were just high on marijuana. Can it happen? Absolutely. But most of the time, they add other stuff on board. Meth,
Yep.
cocaine, things like that. So I'm all for, and I think there's a bill. I think they're talking about legalizing it on the national level now.
Yeah, there are actually a few bills in play. The MORE Act was passed in the House last week. It is unlikely to have a good chance in the Senate, unfortunately, but there are a handful of solid
Yeah,
bills that we're working on. And, meanwhile, we're trying to make sure at least medical patients have access where they need it
yeah,
in places like South Carolina, where, hopefully we'll be able to get this bill passed this year.
yeah. And I never, like I said, Jeff, I've never had a problem with marijuana. Now, if we talk other stuff, yeah, I might have an issue with legalizing heroin and all kinds of the other stuff. I mean, because
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
that's a conversation for another day because it's a
Yeah,
long
yeah,
one, and I think there's a million different angles on it.
yeah.
But I think criminalizing drug addiction is a
No,
problem
I
in our
agree with
country.
that. I agree with that. I think, we definitely, I mean, I'm speaking to the choir, that.
Yeah,
We need to spend more time, more resources treating the addiction, than just throwing people in prison. Because
yeah,
the recidivism rates are through the roof. You might get treated when you're in jail or prison, but what happens when you get out? Well, a
right,
lot of times people fall right back into that behavior,
yeah,
and it's just a revolving door. So I also agree with you. I think if you look at some of these people that are incarcerated for whatever drug offense, do they really need to be in prison
right,
for 30 or 40 years? Unless there's
right.
another underlying crime like murder or something like that.
Of course, yeah,
But if it's just drug offense, well, maybe they would benefit. Maybe we could spend more time and effort, you know, preparing
yeah,
them to get out, and
right,
maybe not putting
right.
them throwing away the key for 30 years. I'm a
Yeah,
big advocate too of really quick of reentry programs, meaning when
yeah,
people get out of prison, as you know and your listeners know, okay, what are we doing to prepare people to get out?
yeah,
Are we, and I know it's difficult, it's always a money thing,
yeah.
but reentry programs, I think we need to focus more on those too.
I agree 100%. I visited an incredible reentry program this week in Columbia, South Carolina
Mhm.
called Turn 90. They're also in Charleston, looking at other areas to expand to, but they're helping men that come out of prison reenter society via a lot of learning and also on the job experience. It's a fascinating organization. Hope to have them on sometime. But in general, one thing I talked about with Amy over there was that our government needs some kind of like reentry office. Like there's no when
Yeah.
people leave jail, they just sort of leave them. And it's harder than anyone that hasn't done it, including myself, can imagine to reintegrate into society after being incarcerated.
Well, and the reality is, and that's well said, Jeff. And the reality is, and you know this, that some people I think don't realize that the majority of people that are incarcerated, jail or prison, are going to get out at some point. I think there's a view out there with a lot of people, well, they're in prison, they're never going to get out. No, very small percentage are in there for life or on death row or whatever. The majority of people are going to get out at some point. Might take a few years, but they're going to get out.
Yeah.
So, what are we doing to prepare them? We
Yeah,
lead
I
the
mean,
world in the most incarcerated people.
yeah. Yeah, I would love to see more of a focus of more of a focus on reintegration, more of a focus
Hmm.
on incentivizing the system to prepare people for success in society when they get out. And there's so much stigma behind that, and so many unnecessary laws around, or not
Hmm.
even laws, just policies on not taking felons in certain organizations and things like
Yeah.
that. And I think hopefully we can continue to work to lower the barriers for people to reintegrate.
Yeah. And we were talking about marijuana earlier. You remember, maybe you remember, or your listeners do, and I'm not old enough because I wasn't alive during the time, but in the 20s and 30s, they had, this war on marijuana, Reefer Madness and things
Yeah,
like that. These shows where that's still, ingrained in a lot of the psyche of Americans. Whereas, I mean, from a long time ago, where this all-out assault on marijuana, and again, I'm not out there drumming, doing the drums for marijuana. I just don't care about it. If people want to smoke it, I think there's more, more things to worry about than just marijuana. But I think that's still ingrained in our society.
yeah.
And I mean, we're, oh my God, marijuana.
Yeah, we're
Well,
certainly trying to fight that stigma, and
yeah,
the polling shows that most people are pretty comfortable with it now, but I do think there's still plenty of work to be done, and there's definitely still some of that reefer madness culture, especially in the older generation.
exactly, exactly.
So, but we're moving in the right direction at least.
Yeah, like I said, there wasn't any big, huge spike in crime in Colorado, at least from my perspective in law enforcement. People would always ask me, "Oh my God, it's Colorado. I mean, crime must be through the roof. Everybody's driving high." We still have more problems with alcohol.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
So
you won't get an argument from me on that. I mean, alcohol is certainly more potentially detrimental than cannabis, and um, but yeah, I mean, we're moving in the right direction at
yeah,
least.
yeah.
Uh, so in your time in law enforcement and with FHE, you've certainly touched a lot of lives in really important ways. Is
Mhm.
there any story or stories in particular that really stand out on a time when you
Oh,
realized how your work could affect change?
are you talking about my time in law enforcement, or are you talking
Over any
what
of
do you?
it, whether you were in law enforcement, whether you were teaching, whether you were working at FHE, just is there a time, where either someone came up to you, you saw something happen as a result of your work that just was like, wow, like I can really make a change for someone or something?
Yeah, I mean, I've had many experiences like that, brother, where people come up to me and say, "I mean, you know, you even said it, I mean, being able to come forward and talk about, my struggles, if that can help." And I've had many people come up to me and say, look, I appreciate you, sharing your story, because that gives me hope. That gives me, maybe a reason to step forward. Then it makes me happy. It makes me very grateful. I know it sounds crazy, grateful to go through the experience I did, but now I'm in a position where I can help somebody else. So I mean, that happens all the time, and I'm not trying to sound, egotistical, but a lot of
No,
people reach out to me through my show and they say, "Man, thank you for talking about, the problems and issues." And I'm an open book, Jeff. I mean, now if you would have again asked me a couple of years ago to talk about my issues, I would have told you to go pound sand. But if
right,
my story can be the roadmap, or for somebody else, then I'm happy.
yeah,
And I've done my job. If I could just help one person,
yeah,
get the help they need, or people call me all the time. Hey, I need to talk to you about something. Absolutely, go ahead.
yeah,
I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor, but I've been through some bad stuff,
yeah,
and I can speak to my experience and what I did in order to hopefully avert somebody from doing what I did, or going down that path.
yeah,
You know, if it's if it's predictable, it's preventable. There's a saying in law enforcement. If it's predictable, it's preventable.
yeah,
So I just want people that are suffering out there, law enforcement or not, to reach out, to trusted people. And I say trusted people because some people you can't trust, with your information. I mean, I'm sure you don't open up to everybody, Jeff. I don't. So it's a matter of reaching out to those trusted family and friends and telling them, "Look, I need help," or "This is what I'm
yeah,
struggling with." Because, like I said before, brother, we're all suffering from something. We're all struggling with something: financial, personal, professional, whatever.
yeah,
We all go through life and we carry baggage.
yeah,
So, what makes me get up in the morning, like I said in the beginning, is getting up and connecting with people that I can do whatever I can to help them. That's what brings a smile to my face.
Awesome. I can definitely appreciate that. We may have touched on it briefly earlier, but you started in the army and then went into law enforcement. What originally drove you to want to help people? Like, was there something about your childhood that pushed you in that direction? What got you there?
I think it was just innate, brother. I mean, like I said, I come from a law enforcement military family, so and that's just the way I was raised. I was raised by and it's, taking care of yourself, obviously, first, but, just in that service kind of mindset that I grew up with. My dad was in the military for many, many years. My mom was a nurse for many years. She worked as a psychiatric nurse. So it was that environment of giving back. So I think that, rubbed off on me with my time in the military and time in law enforcement. And like I said, it just got in my blood and I just ran with it, and had a great career with it.
I'm sure you've had a lot of great people come through your life during your
Yeah.
career. Is there anyone in particular that really stood out as a mentor?
Oh, yeah. I mean, too many to name.
Yeah,
People in the military, people in law enforcement. And I'm just talking about people in leadership positions because I believe you don't have to have a special, you don't have to title, you don't have to have rank to be a leader. But so many people within my life, have been mentors and coaches, along the way. And I still have mentors and coaches. The one of the things that I believe in, Jeffrey, is surrounding yourself with the right people because those people are going to define really who you are. Jim Rohn, famous philanthropist, thought leader. I mean, he said a long time ago, you're the average of the 5 people that you associate with. And that is so true. So for the listener out there, I mean, who are you associating with? Are you associating with people who are pushing you up, to higher heights, or are you associating with people who are kind of bringing you down?
right,
The people in your life are probably going to change at different phases, in your life. What the person that you needed a couple of years ago, maybe you don't need them in your life anymore. And I'm not trying to
right.
say go ahead and discard people. I'm not saying that, but you are who you associate with. I'm a parent. My kids are adults now, and they're older. But I remember when they were kids. I would say, "Oh, don't hang out with those kids." Well, why? Because they get in trouble all the time. Why? Is because we are who we associate with. So if you're out there, I always encourage people when I give speeches and things like that, to okay, do a people inventory. I know it sounds weird, but who is influencing you within your circle now? If it's good influences, well then keep with it. If it's bad influences, you have the power to determine who's going to be within your circle. Now it's a little tricky when it comes to family because we all have the family members that, oh God, here we go again. But it doesn't mean that you don't love them and you don't have to spend much time with them. Now friends come and go.
Yeah,
But, do a people inventory, and okay, who's influencing me? Who's building me up? And you reciprocate and you do that for them. But who is there for me? Who's not there for me? And you'd be surprised at what you're going to find out,
yeah, yeah.
So I think that's very important who you associate with.
Absolutely. I think that's an important exercise for everybody to think
Hmm.
about. So one thing we do on my podcast is guests can ask me a question if they'd like. So feel free.
I'm going to ask you a question, buddy.
All right.
What advice would you give somebody out there who's listening to this amazing show of yours that is thinking about starting a podcast? What advice would you give them?
All right.
See, I stumped you. You thought it was gonna be something
No,
like
no,
who's your favorite sports team or something.
no. I did not expect
It's just
that,
the
but
Broncos, of course, right?
I'm a hockey guy, so I'd go
Oh, so it's the
with the
Avs?
Avs. Yeah, I mean, I'm always been a big Pittsburgh Penguins fan as well. But yes, let's see. Starting a podcast, I mean, I would say create a plan and just do it. I mean, that was one of my
Oh,
favorite things about starting a podcast was that, I would do some work in the film industry and there's all these barriers in Hollywood that you have to deal with
yeah,
and
yeah.
egos and politics. Like this, we can just have the conversation and we can put it out there. And that's what I love about it. So I'd say if you're thinking about it, um, decide on sort of a direction that you want to go. I think it's important to have some sort of point of view, but Otherwise, just start doing it, and it'll improve every single episode, as I'm sure you know. Um, right? You learn a
Absolutely.
lot every time that you do it, and so it's one of those. In life in general, I generally am the type to just to jump into things. I've done it in a
Yeah.
variety of businesses, so it was kind of my MO. But I would say, sort of take that from me, at least in this podcast area, and just jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't wait for the perfect time because there's no perfect time.
Right?
The traffic lights of life are never going to be all green at the same time.
Yeah.
So if
Exactly.
you're not
It's
starting a podcast, somebody else is. So
exactly.
great,
Yep.
great advice, brother.
I appreciate it. Um, and then in addition to that one, there's a question that I ask all the guests.
Mhm.
Um, if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be, and how do you think that change would reverberate?
Hmm. If I could snap my fingers and change one thing in the world,
Yep, any one
hmm,
thing, and you can interpret that how you will.
I would, I know it sounds corny, but I really do believe in this. If I could snap my fingers, I'd get rid of hate,
Yeah,
you know, and
absolutely.
hate and love more. And I know that some people are going, no, it's true.
Mm,
Love is the most powerful force out there.
yeah,
So if we can get rid of hate, snap my fingers, and have more love out there and caring for each other, I think it would reverberate and we'd have a better world.
I do agree with that. It's something I think about a lot, and I'll
Mhm.
say, I don't know that we want to dig into this conversation or know where your mindset is around it, but um, I think that psychedelics being the bigger part of people's lives is part of that, in terms of love and getting rid of hate. And um, we talked about drug policy before, and you sort of asked about where I am, and I think a lot, like you were saying, fentanyl and things that kill people are the problem. The pharmaceuticals are the real problem, and there's a lot of natural remedies that I think people need to be more open to. And
Absolutely.
a lot of my feeling around that is that they breed love.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting you mentioned that, Jeff, because there are a lot of studies out there going on, as you probably know. You take somebody with that is suffering from like PTSD. Well, now they're using like ketamine,
Mhm.
I mean, which is a horse tranquilizer essentially. I mean, I remember, Special K or whatever you want to call it on the street, but now it has medical applications, and they're using things like other say mushrooms and things like
Yep.
that to treat people
Yeah.
for uh, for PTSD, which is
Yeah.
amazing, and I'm all for that. I'm all for that. I mean, I just, like I said, with fentanyl and carfentanil and all this other crap out there, that's the stuff that scares me, about
Yeah.
legalism. And I don't think you're talking about that stuff.
No.
You're talking about the other natural stuff, which I'd be down for, as long as it's controlled and things like that. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, and that's the way to do it. And there are certain things that may have natural origins but aren't so natural, like MDMA. But
Yeah.
that's an example of another one that there's really incredible PTSD trials for veterans that have been
Yeah.
going on. Um, phase 3 fast track with the FDA via the
Hmm.
MAPS organization, maps.org for everyone listening. Rick Doblin, the founder there, has been doing incredible work. And I've met veterans that have been in their trials, and it's changed their lives. And the percentage of people that don't have PTSD symptoms years later is like nothing else, in terms of pharmaceuticals. So it's really been interesting.
I think, I mean, this is just my naive thought on this. If you think it's naive or the listeners is, I think everything that we need to take care of ourselves is in nature somewhere. Maybe
Yeah.
we found it, maybe we haven't found it, but I think it's in nature. And I'm all for, you know, this is not a knock on the pharmaceutical industry, but I get tired of people just okay, the kid's acting up, they must be, have,
Right.
88, attention deficit, ADHD. We got to put them on some medication. Well, that makes the pharmaceutical companies very happy because now they
Right.
have a client for life.
Right.
But why don't we explore, like you said, some of these other options that are more natural and that maybe are going to do more? They're gonna help more than you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I
You know?
mean, this sort of theme of misaligned incentives has come up a lot for me on the show and in life lately. And the pharmaceutical industry is part of that. I mean, their built in monetary incentives are for people to buy more pills. So
Yeah.
therefore, they'd rather people be on things monthly than something natural that can be healing. And so I think that I'm not saying that I'm even trying to villainize them because that's what their model is built for. It's that we need to create new models,
Well, I agree, and I do think, medicine has its place. I mean,
of
but,
course.
like, when I go to the doctor and I'm old. I'm getting older, Jeff, so maybe that's part of it. But I remember, I had something going on medically a couple years ago, and I went to my primary, and he said, "Well, you gotta be on this medicine for the rest of your life." I'm like, "Well, hold on here. How do you know
Right,
I have to be on it for the rest of my life?" He's like, "Well, your age," and I was like, "Okay." But isn't it possible in the future? I didn't go to medical school, but isn't it possible that I could phase off this in the future? Well, I don't think so. So I'm thinking, well, how do you? Because medicine is not an exact science,
right.
you know. I mean, so how do you know that? And again, like you said, I'm not trying to villainize the pharmaceutical industry. I'm not saying that because I think medicine has its place.
Yeah,
You know, at some point, I think we're all going to need some sort of medicine, maybe.
absolutely.
But what really kind of bothers me, and I saw this a lot in law enforcement, is especially with young kids. I remember, I grew up, I'm older than you probably, but, growing up and, kids would act up in class and maybe they did have something going on upstairs. I have no idea. But now it seems like every kid that gets out of line, oh, well, they need to be on medication. They got a attention deficit and maybe they do. I have no idea, but it seems like we're in a society now that's more, quick to write a script
Yeah,
than to say, "Oh, the kid's just being a dumbass. He's just goofing off." Or
right.
is that
Agreed.
does
Yeah,
that mean that does that mean that he needs to be on some sort of Ritalin for the rest of his life?
right.
I don't know. That's just
Yeah,
me. That's my rant, Jeff.
no, I'll take it. I'll take it. Absolutely. I mean, I think that we're definitely quick to jump to conclusions in some areas, and
Yeah,
um, I do want to know how our listeners can support you and your impact, and I know that
yeah,
one way is by listening to your podcast. So maybe if
yeah.
you want to just tell us what we'll get when we listen to your podcast.
Well, I have all, and thank you for mentioning it, Jeff. I appreciate it. My podcast again is called CJ Evolution. You can find everything at cjevolution.com. My social media, everything. There's a link to Shatterproof, like we talked about in FHE, on my website. So if you want more information, you can either DM me, reach out to me through my contact form on my site, or just reach out to me, call me. My number, you can find it all over social media. But all my shows are there. You can find all my podcasts on that site. You can find my speaking engagements. My coaching that I have, and again, everything you need to know about me is on the website cjevolution.com.
Okay, great. And it looks like just looking through the site that you've interviewed quite a variety of people. Is there
Yeah.
like a general, I mean, obviously criminal justice, but is there a general direction or theme or anything that people can expect if they just like randomly pick an episode?
Great question. So, I mean, I'm like you. I'm pretty picky of who I want to be on the show, but I've had people on the show, Jeff, that are maybe financial experts, and people think, well, what does that have to do with criminal justice? Because everybody's interested in money, they want to take care of their finances and stuff like that. So that weaves into it. I've had nutritional people, I've had actors on the show, I've had veterans on the show, leadership experts, uh, all different types of people that we can weave back into the criminal justice field. Because again, I'm approached by people sometimes, and they want to come on the show, and I'm like, I'm not just trying to sound mean, but I don't know how that would fit into my
Right.
listenership. So, I like having people on the show that maybe have nothing to do with criminal justice, but we can weave it back into the
Yeah.
show and the criminal justice field because it's applicable. I've had people on the show that have been in prison
Yeah.
for years that have come on the show to get their perspective on the criminal
Yeah.
justice field. So I like having different views, not just a myopic view of law enforcement. But I don't just talk on my show about, lack of a better word, war stories and police stories. Those have their place and they're important. But I like to center around like wellness now and nutrition and things like that. When I first started this show a long time ago, Jeff, again, I just didn't want to sit around and tell the listeners how many people I arrested or what I was dealing with, because first responders are dealing with crap all the time. And that's what they signed up for, and that's what they're paid for. I wanted to have more of a positive spin on it and talk about motivation and inspiration. A lot of those is brought out through the guests. So I do talk about issues like use of force, drug stuff, critical incidents and things like that. But now I've kind of pivoted a little bit in the last couple of years, and I want to uplift, the listeners. I don't want them because they're seeing that all the time. I want to uplift and motivate. So if the listener out there wants to click on any of the shows, I do a microcast Monday on Monday that I started a couple years back, and that's just motivation and inspiration. It gets you started on your week, and then again, I have just amazing guests. You're going to come on the show. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
I just have just an amazing guest come on the show, and I like to uplift now, not
Yeah,
talk about depressing stuff. Not living in a bubble. I know that there's a lot of
right.
depressing stuff out there, and all I have to do is just turn on the news.
But yeah, I was gonna say that stuff gets enough highlight, right? Like I
Yeah,
like that. I think both of us are trying to highlight some of the positive things going on,
exactly.
and because someone's got to do it, right?
Well, and as a career in law enforcement, Jeff, I had a pretty myopic view of the world when I was a young cop, and that's just how I was conditioned. But as I got older, I mean, I slowly started to realize, and I expanded my network outside of law enforcement. I started to realize, look, most people are good people. I mean, they just are. And maybe people are out there going, "Oh, he's full of crap. He doesn't know it." No, I think most people are good people. It's just the problem we have in law enforcement is that we're just dealing with that 10% or that whatever 8% that and so we get a skewed view on the world where everybody's a criminal.
Right,
Everybody's, robbing, killing, stealing, whatever. And that's not the case.
right.
And the other piece of advice I give law enforcement out there, because I talk to a lot of cops, is get friends outside of law enforcement.
Mm.
Don't, and again, that's not a knock on law enforcement. I love law enforcement, but you need to see the other view.
Yeah,
You need to get friends outside of law enforcement to kind of balance you out. Because when I started doing that years ago, I started to realize that most people are just good people. Maybe they mess up, make mistakes, and there are bad people out there. I'm not trying to discount that, but most people are good. So you just need to venture out. If you're in law
yeah.
enforcement, and get other friends outside law
I
enforcement.
mean, I think that's probably applicable to. I mean, it's definitely applicable to first responders, but applicable to all sorts of
Exactly.
jobs in terms of people that
Absolutely.
have totally different lives going on. Get another
Because
perspective.
that's where the learning takes place, right? I mean, I think you learn about what other people, what they do and their experiences and things like that. That's what keeps us growing, and at least me is learning about other people. Like I said, I've had people incarcerated
Yeah.
on the show, and I was thinking, oh my god, they'd never come on the show. They're like,
Likewise.
yeah, and
I,
they were like, I never. They were like, I don't hate cops. Yeah, I dealt with some cops that were not good cops, but it is what it is. So, I mean, it's good to see different perspectives on things.
yeah. Agreed. Well, it's been awesome getting your perspective today for the audience, and
Thank you, sir.
really appreciate having you here. Excited to join you on your show, and
Yeah.
um, look forward to continuing our conversation.
Thank you, brother. Keep up the good work. I love your show.
Thanks for listening to this episode of People Are the Answer. To find out more, go to peoplearetheanswer.com.